All right, are you welcoming everybody in?
Sorry, I guess I have to do that.
Sorry,
I can't see anybody else. Or else.
Thank you, Michelle. Hello, everyone. Welcome to RSSL Resiliency Framework Office Hours. We apologize for a couple minutes of delay there. We had some technical opportunities to problem solve through. It is the 16th of August. I hope you're all doing well. I'm Jennifer Patterson with the Office of Teaching, Learning, and Assessment here at ODE, and I'm happy to be spending another Monday afternoon with you. I'm joined by colleagues Kati, Tennille, and Scott, and I believe Deb is here as well. So we will be helping to hold space for your questions and your inquiry. Also, Ken Greenbaum, Alexa Pearson, and Dan Farley, I believe, are joining. So we hope to bring forward our collective best to help you with any questions that you may have today. So just a reminder, we've designed this August series of office hours to really help center and provide clarity around the RSSL resiliency framework for the 21-22 school year. We also hope to shine a light and help unpack a little bit of the ESSER 3 district plan in upcoming office hours this August. We want to hold space for your questions and your ideas. And we want to reinforce big anchor values and ideas that help steady us when the storm becomes bigger, like it is now. And we also want to create a way where we spark conversation and deeper sense making in a mechanism that feels a little bit more human and personal, and some two-way communication that this affords. We know there's a lot of you. There's 167 of us here today. So we hope to get as much of your voice in this space as we can. Scott and I will be co-facilitating. Kati will be presenting a lot as well today. And we've got some fantastic skillful navigators, Sarah, Hayden, Joanne, and Michelle, here to support as needed in the chat as well today. So after this brief welcome, we'll overview our key topics for today. Just a reminder to use chat in any way to help get your specific questions answered and addressed. And these are recorded and posted, so you can view them at any time. And if you have to leave early, you can take a look at what happened while you were gone. So today we're hoping to really preview the following content. We want to give a COVID-19 update in Oregon, just to help situate the larger context that we're all navigating and leading in. We also want to provide some highlights of rule change updates that were shared out via email from the department on Friday, but want to unpack those a little bit with you and zoom in around what's the new update related to face coverings and 5-year-olds and up. Mask and athletics, and then also athletics and air quality. And then we'll wrap it up with just a reminder around the continuity of services plan that's due on the 27th of this month. And again, throughout, hold space for your questions and points of clarification. So feel free to use the chat as can be most helpful. With that, Kati Mosley is going to help us make some sense of a couple of graphs that will help us get connected with a larger picture around COVID-19 in Oregon. Thanks, Kati.
Thanks, Jennifer. I had a moment where you said, help us make some sense. And I thought, it's a tall order to make sense of this moment we're living through. But I do think we're all in this trying to work through it together and make some sense of it. So this slide, some of you may have seen, we borrow it from the Oregon Health Authority, of course, and the real takeaway from it is that we are currently experiencing and anticipate experiencing a continued sharp increase in COVID-19 cases and hospitalizations in Oregon, driven largely by low vaccination rates and the Delta variant, which has turned out to be much more adaptable to the way that we live as humans than the wild type COVID virus was. So it's a sobering moment. I think a lot of us are coming to grips with what this means as we're planning to open schools, and also coming to grips with what it means to let go or set aside for the moment much of the optimism that we had in the spring and summer about what the fall would look like in terms of COVID as we were contemplating a return to full-time in-person instruction. We at ODE are processing this as well and talking about it, and remain committed to doing everything possible to make sure that as many kids as possible are in school for as many school days as possible in the coming school year. So you can see the sharp increase that we're experiencing towards the right edge of the slide, and then the blue highlighted area kind of starts to map out what the future, the next few weeks look like, with Oregon Health Authority, I believe, still currently anticipating that we would see a peak around September 1st. Next slide, please. You can also see the trends in hospitalization by severity. This is another important graph to look at, because again, both total COVID-19 patients on ventilators, which is the lightest colored line towards the bottom of the slide, the darker orange line, which is the total COVID-19 patients in ICU beds, and the total COVID-19 patients, which is that darkest orange line, are on really mind-blowing upticks, sharper inclines than we have seen in a long time, possibly ever during the last 15 to 18 months that we've been in this pandemic. And that's just a reflection, again, of getting us grounded in where we are with the virus. And we know that the virus makes the timeline, and our communities and schools are going to be living with the virus until there's widespread immunity, and we're still quite a ways off from that. And it's a lot to settle into some of these charts and really see where the numbers say we're at. Next slide, please. This slide is a description of recent cases by age and week of onset. And I think that the takeaway from it is that in our younger age groups, we are seeing increases in cases by age. So we see that 0 to 9-year-olds is sort of, I would call it maroon on my screen, line, is trending upward as well at a rate that is sharper than we've seen case rates be since May. Look, this graph looks back at May. So we know that this variant of the virus is is affecting more children, and we're all together navigating the reality of that as we think about returning to full-time in-person instruction across the state. Next slide, please. And then finally, the last data-related slide before we move into talking about some of the things that are very operational for you all that are happening in response to these rates, is to look at our community transmission rates by county in Oregon. And I know for some of you, these county lines aren't always the easiest to work through and across, because your districts may or may not be within a single county. But you can see here that according to the evidence-based metrics used both by our Oregon state public health officials and also the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the majority of Oregon is categorized as a high transmission area for COVID-19 right now, as we're moving through this 5th wave of the pandemic. And what that means, what that has meant for schools in particular, is that as the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention have learned more about what the Delta variant, how it moves through community and how it operates, they have provided guidance related to indoor masking and vaccinations and other mitigation measures that align with this framework. And that has influenced in turn how Oregon public health officials have responded to the pandemic in the past few weeks. I'll pause there and see if any of my colleagues have context they'd like to add around these very sobering slides before I move into talking about some updates, particularly to related to face coverings.
Kati, I want to add two things and then pose a question that came to me in private chat. One is just appreciation for what it takes to hold this information and what this update really represents for us. I think that we just want to acknowledge the tremendous amount of fatigue and overall kind of somber emotional space that this generates for many of us as we sit with this and try to make sense of what this means and who stands to be most impacted by these trends and what this may bring. So I just want to, I know that for us at ODE, there's just a lot of emotion that we're sorting through, and imagine for you as well. That being situated in this moment in this pandemic with the data that Kati just shared takes a while to kind of penetrate and make sense of. As Scott said, it's hard to sit with. And so I want to give voice to that. I also think it's important. There was a question asked to me privately, Kati, about is the state providing any guidance on moving forward to hybrid versus in-person given the COVID numbers?
So that's a good question. And I was going to bring that into the conversation later, and I'm also very happy to address it now. I think we are attending to two priorities is how I would frame this. And again, I would call on my colleagues from ODE to add to this. I think we're attending to two priorities around this. We're remaining optimistic and wanting to support in every way possible a return to full-time in-person instruction for as many school days as possible, for as many students as possible during this school year. We're also sinking in, as Jennifer said, to the reality of some of these slides and where Oregon is with the pandemic. And we want to also be prepared and ready to support districts with a need to shift based on how COVID is moving through their community, so that we can be as supportive and have as few policy and procedure barriers as possible in place in order for districts to do what they need to do to best serve students through this school year. So we're holding both of those, and it's complicated and they cause cognitive dissonance with each other. And we all are attending every day to talking about that and how we do both of those things for the future, because we have to be driving towards the goal that is best for students and families, which we know isn't in-person learning. And we also need to be ready to be as supportive as possible if the situation shifts with COVID such that that goal is not achievable. I think that's the reality, and it's a hard reality to stomach. And I mean that kind of literally for me, like I feel it in my stomach. But that is what we are trying to hold every day. And again, I would invite my colleagues to add their perspectives on how we're doing this, because it's a lot.
I'll just add, Kati, all of the difficulty, and it is hard to look at the numbers after all the work of the last year and so much hope for children and families and communities. Everything that we know at this moment in time is the decisions about how to navigate. So similar to your question, like hybrid, not hybrid, distance learning, remote options are local decisions. And, we've talked in this call for, over the last year, a lot about the kind of jurisdiction and authority. So the state has intervened and said face masks, whether you want them or you don't want them, face coverings, the numbers are too high. Key mitigation strategy. The resiliency framework offers a few other things that have requirements, but everything else at the moment is in the hands of superintendents and school boards and local public health authorities. And that means local communities have to be having conversations about what to do with this information, which means, like folks asking for the slides, all of you have roles to play in helping communicate information and help local leaders make those decisions. There can be strength in those decisions. And that's what we know at the moment. There's certainly no pretending that people aren't at Kati's level or with the governor, like in different roles, trying to make sense of all of this in real time and, certainly ask questions. Kati, tell me if I'm wrong. So that people are clear, like we're not in a moment where we think there's some kind of impending state action. We know things can change, but that's not the mentality you should leave the call with. The mentality you should leave with is local leaders, local decisions, and trying to communicate that with folks. And I'm checking that, Kati, in real time with you, but just making sure that that's the right way to.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's what I was trying to convey, is that we're trying to do both in service of students in Oregon, and we're trying to hold both at the same time. So I'll go ahead then and ask for the next slide. And I'm really happy actually to have an opportunity to clarify information around both the K-12 indoor face covering rule from OHA and the newer indoor face covering rule from OHA, the one that just covers all indoor settings. And I tried to build the slides a little bit out so that you could hopefully feel like you're tracking both of these rules and kind of their interaction and implications for schools. I will also say that right before this meeting, I gave our communications team the narrative update around this for the resiliency framework, a clarifying email, and then we have updated the FAQs for the K-12 indoor mask rule as well. And all of that should be to you in writing tomorrow morning. So I'm covering the same information, and you'll get it again. And I hope this helps answer some of what I know were burning questions about the rules. So on the 12th of August, OHA adopted OAR 333-019-1025, which requires everyone 5 years of age or older to wear a face covering anywhere indoors. At the same time, on the 13th, so shortly thereafter, they updated the K-12 face covering rule, which is OAR 333-019-1015. The rule now applies to children 5 years of age or older. Previously, it had applied to children 2 years of age or older. So that's been aligned now between the two rules and with ELD guidance. And the Early Learning Division has clarified that their programs only need to implement the face covering requirement for school age care beginning at kindergarten. This means that children in 0 to 5 programs, particularly preschool classrooms with 3 to 5 year olds, will not have to wear a face covering. That's clarity again that will be in writing tomorrow morning. ELD is planning an update this afternoon as well and sharing on their platforms so that their providers have this information as well. And then I also want to make sure it's clear that both of these rules, the overall indoor face covering rule from OHA and the K-12 face covering rule, make clear that for individuals who are using public transportation, and public transportation includes school buses operated by public or private schools, the age for wearing a face covering is 2 and older. And that is because that is a federal law that we can't change. So 5+ in the K-12 setting and indoors, unless you're on a public transportation or in a transportation hub like a airport, in which case it is 2 and up for face coverings. I hope that answers what I know I've gotten a lot of questions about, and we can loop back to it and try to go through it again if there's still lingering questions around it. Again, knowing that further written clarity will be forthcoming from both Early Learning Division and from ourselves in more detail when we get this package of updates out again tomorrow. I'll pause, and it looks like there is a question. Should I try to tackle that now, Jennifer?
Yeah, if you can, Kati, I think it would be helpful. So I'll read it out loud just for everyone's benefit. So there's a question that says, sorry, it still seems confusing, which number one, I just want to say thank you for slowing us down and naming what still hasn't made sense so that we can reiterate it in a different way. The rule now applies to children 5 years of age and older versus preschool classrooms with 3 to 5 year olds will not have to wear a face covering. What about the 5-year-old in class with the 3 and 4 year olds?
So the way that I understand this is that is what it is saying. It is talking about the 5-year-old in class with 3 to 5 year olds will not have to wear a face covering. The 5-year-old in kindergarten will need to wear a face covering. That is my understanding. Does that track?
Well, I think the one question so it names early learning division programs. And so for a 0 to 5 program in ELD, I think it's pretty clear. If you're a school district and you're running a 3, 4, 5 program, that's not under the ELD. Is that, or the 4, 5 part could not be under ELD, it still applies. So I could imagine folks getting a little puzzled about the lingo there. So basically, if you have people under the age of 5 and they don't have to wear masks, the 5-year-olds don't have to. Is that how you understand it, or is it truly split by jurisdiction?
I think the intention is, and this is a question we should go back and make sure we have clarified, so thank you. I think the intention is that a 5-year-old who is not in a kindergarten class would not need to wear a face covering. So a 5-year-old who's in a pre-K class would not need to. A 5-year-old in kindergarten, because it's the K-12 rule. And I appreciate the question because that offers us the opportunity to dig for further clarity.
And I think, Katya and Scott, it's also, I'm reminded of some wisdom that we once collected in this same room about a year ago, that when in doubt, have kids wear masks. I mean, I think that's a really good place to land. So if you've got 4 through 6 year olds, as Naya, it looks like you do, and you're unsure of what it means, there's always the least amount of risk in having the most amount of students wear masks. So that's another helpful kind of way to problem solve in the moment or through a context or situation if there's parts of it that feel uncertain.
Thank you for that, Jennifer. And I will take that specific question back again and try to seek more clarity on it. What I've shared is my understanding of what the intention underlying the rules is what the intentions were. Any questions about the public transportation piece? That's pretty clear for folks. School buses, whether operated by a public school or a private school, are considered public transportation. So, all right, next slide, please. Let's talk a little bit now about masks and sports, which again has been a historic area of a lot of confusion. And I feel like these rules align more logically than maybe things have in the past to result in a shared understanding. And I'll lean on KT as well to help support that shared understanding. What I thought would be helpful would be to start with the rules and then move into the OSAA pieces of communication so that we can hopefully see that there's alignment from rules into what OSAA has said that will hopefully make sense. So in the K-12 face covering rule, it is made specific that an individual is not required to wear a mask if they're engaged in a sport during physical education classes such as swimming or other water sports, or a sport where wearing a mask could be a strangulation hazard, such as gymnastics or wrestling. So if it's impractical to wear a mask, such as during swimming, it's not a practical intervention to wear a mask. It's an individual is not required to wear a mask. They're also, under the K-12 rule, there's no requirement to wear a mask when practicing or playing a competitive extracurricular sport at any level. The indoor face covering rule, so OAR 333-019-1025, says specifically that an individual is not required to wear a mask when they are engaged in an activity that makes wearing a mask not feasible, again, such as when swimming, and is practicing or playing a competitive sport at any level. Both do not create an exception for spectators, coaches, or others who are not playing the sport, and those people must wear a face covering indoors. Next slide, please. And then I think this was an August 9th communication and update from OSAA, kind of aligning again through these two rules into some practical operational implementation of it, which is to say that regardless of vaccination status, individuals are required to wear a mask, face covering, or face shield when in an indoor space, unless they are doing these things: swimming or engaged in an activity it's not feasible or practical, practicing or playing a competitive sport, or performing, not including but not limited to music, or delivering a speech to an audience. So masks are not required by OHA when practicing or playing a competitive sport indoors, such as volleyball. That is for the athletes. Again, coaches, support people on the side, other people, spectators are required to wear an indoor face covering. And of course, I think it's always good to say the OHA rule doesn't prohibit a school or a district from applying a more protective requirement that they feel is appropriate for the COVID context that they're operating in. And that is a local school decision. And of course, always consult with your legal counsel and PACE with any questions regarding liability. I'll ask KT what you'd like to add and what I might have gotten. If I got anything wrong, definitely clarify that.
Kati, I think that was absolutely perfect. So personally, I think you covered it all. There are a couple questions. I saw one come in the chat about choir indoors, and I know we discussed that last week, that our understanding is choir indoors during the school day would still be masked, and even after school would still be masked indoors, but you can get creative and go outside. You already addressed the clarifying question about coaches. That's definitely been a question that's come up when a coach is on the sidelines during a match, actively speaking to their team, they would still be masked, is what I'm hearing from you. That's one clarification we asked OHA. The other one that's come up is asking about officials. So when they're actively engaged, getting the match going and blowing the whistles and those kinds of things is a question that we have not gotten an answer yet to. But we definitely agree and align with all that you just said and put out. So which is perfect. And I did put the link in the chat too, for those who are looking for where it was on our website.
Thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you.
And I'm glad we're aligned. It's a good sign that the logic is tied together for us. And now we have one more update that I was going to ask Jennifer or Scott to talk through. Jennifer, I think you were going to talk about this one.
Yes, to be clear, I'm not an expert in air quality, but I am prepared to provide this update and hopefully clarify some things as is helpful. But the big idea here is that practices may occur when the air quality index is in the orange zone. So that's a range between 100 and 150, provided that the following three things are adhered to. One, that the practice session is no longer than 90 minutes for a total in duration for the day. Secondly, that the level of activity would be described and experienced by the athletes as less than normal. So sort of a lighter practice, not as arduous or strenuous. And that lastly, the practice includes intentional and scheduled rest periods. So what's also true is that when the air quality index is over 100, contests are still prohibited. So there's a link here to the OHA's school outdoor activities during wildfire events. That's probably helpful to have at hand and reference. And then additionally, just a link here for the website that they've updated with their amended policy. Kati, there's still some questions in chat. I'm wondering if we can address a few of them before we move forward. One question that came to me in private chat is, can you help with the language around why masks are required for PE but not for indoor sports? This has been challenging to explain to parents.
So I think a helpful way that I have thought about this, and that Director Gill has really used this language to help guide our thinking overall about questions like this, is thinking and remembering that schools are a place where children are required to be. They're a congregate setting, and that's where children go to be students. And so the responsibility is different there than for a voluntary program, like many after-school programs and sports programs, where a child is making a choice to be in that program. And I think that's why when I was talking about the masks and sports on slide 11, if we could go back up there real quick. One more, there we go. The K-12 face covering rule makes clear that the masking is not, an individual is not required to mask if they're practicing or playing a competitive extracurricular sport. That it's not an educational activity, because that's also been through the 2-week or 3-week life of this K-12 masking rule. I think that we're just starting week 3 that it's been in place. Whether something was an educational activity or not has also been part of the decision-making framework as to where the mask requirement would be applied and where it wouldn't.
Thank you, Kati. Your audio is a little garbled on my end. I don't know if other people were experiencing that, but did people get the essence of Kati's answer there? Okay, I'm seeing nods and thumbs up. All right, thanks for the feedback. There's also, I'm getting pinged by a colleague to ask this question because it continues to come up. Can students sing in choir without a mask?
Choir is not accepted from the K-12 masking rule. I don't believe it's accepted from the indoor masking rule, but it's not accepted from the K-12 masking rule. So again, both because it's not specified, whereas playing an instrument with the mouth is specified, and because of what I think Scott was saying earlier, like the precautionary principle would say, when in doubt, mask. Masks should be worn during choir. Moving to an outdoor setting where you have more space and airflow is optimized because you're outside, those are other ways to answer that question too.
Thank
Or
you.
meet that need.
I think an important distinction too, this is coming up in private chat, that folks are saying, well, what about school? What about a staff gathering or a school board meeting? Those two examples for masks, are they required?
The two examples were staff meetings and school board meetings.
Mm-hmm.
If they are indoors, they are required. And that's under the 333-019-1025, the general indoor masking rule.
So that's probably a big important, since we last met, when we were last together, that rule had not landed, correct, Kati? So this is an update from last Monday. So if you're wondering, yes, why has that changed, I just want to make it clear, because there's a new rule and a new requirement around indoor face coverings that the governor announced last week. So good questions, and I know it probably feels like we're back in this space where things are changing, in fast and rapid ways. And it is hard to get your head wrapped around and say, wait a minute, did I hear this right last week? And so thanks for asking again and pausing us to make sure that this makes sense for you. Katya and colleagues, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up a theme that we've been in conversation with a lot of folks around, that is really trying to clarify how do schools best respond when individual students simply refuse to wear a mask, and they've tried all the best first teaching responses that educators know so well around modeling the behavior, asking, having a conversation, to better understand what the root of the refusal might be, and then to support compliance in ways that don't feel punitive for a student. But ultimately, what I think people are wanting clarification around is, can a school continue to permit a student to attend in-person learning if they absolutely refuse to wear a mask?
So this is a very complicated question. Well, it's an emotively complicated question, I think. And we, in the update to the resiliency framework that I spoke about at the beginning, we're offering a more robust update around this piece as well. And I'm happy to read the language to you, and then you'll receive it when the update is posted. So in the case that a student or family chooses not to wear a face covering for reasons other than medical need or disability, schools should follow district processes to determine how to respond, and are in a complex position of needing to hold both health and safety and the students' need to access education. Conversations should be progressive and lead to resolution that ideally does not involve suspension. Schools cannot serve a person in person if they or their family choose not to wear a face covering. Schools may offer a remote or online school option for that student. We heard some thinking and talking about, well, could all the unmasked students be put in one space and given online school, or with an instructor who was willing to instruct in that unmasked online space? And our understanding and reading of the rule really makes clear that schools cannot serve a student in person if they or their family choose not to wear a face covering. So following what district procedures are around remote learning and what other options there are would be the next step. I would invite Jennifer and Scott to add to that and talk more about it. I know this is one of the ways that how we respond to COVID and health and safety strikes closest to the heart of education.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is an example of where I think the rule is really clear, that students must wear masks, and that districts and schools need to provide an alternative remote setting for students that don't wear masks. And I think that my sense is that the space between, the navigation of that is really best nurtured and led at the local level, because you know your students best, you know the context best, you know the situation. And so for us to provide too much specificity around this at the state level is likely not as helpful. And it's also true that this is a place where you will learn a lot from one another in problem solving this and working through scenarios and or responses that feel most in line with your school culture, your district culture, around how you tackle things of this nature. Scott, anything to add?
Yeah, take a risk. Some of you know, like I was going to be a minister when I was a kid, so I'm going to apologize in advance for like the mini sermon. But could we put the EpiCurve slide back up on the top? So what I know is that communities are made up of the people who are closest to them, and you all might have your own political views or your own family views. But what I know is those numbers come because we're not in the right situation with a combination of people who are vaccinated and people wearing face coverings. And the bottom line is that people are going to get sick and are going to die unless we do those things. And it won't matter whether I say it, or whether Kati says it, but it would matter what you say and what you do in your staff meetings and what you do in your communities and what you do with your kids. And we don't need to sermonize everybody or freak everybody out, but it will only happen if people go, look, the rule is the rule, the law is the law, but anyone who's taught kids knows that you don't move kids by pointing to rules. Like you move them by teaching or sharing or telling stories or making it fun or interesting or educating. And we're at another one of those moments, whether we want to be or not, right? So we might not want to be here, but we are here. So everyone's got to kind of grapple and then go like, forget the rules, forget the politics, forget that I'll piss off my boss or the commissioners or whoever it is. And like, you got to tell families, I'm talking to my parents and my grandparents and my kids and going like, look, I'm done with the pandemic too. And you got to wear your face covering again inside when your friends come over. And that sucks. But like, that is where we're at. And if you need more info about why that's there, we can provide it in loads. But people who are vaccinated can transmit this Delta variant where they couldn't before. That's a sea change. The numbers are going up because that's part of the situation. Also, we have a ton of unvaccinated people. So if we care about people, we got to wear masks. End of sermon. But like, to me, it's just like, you got to figure that out. And like, all systems go, figure out how to get people to do that.
Thank you, Scott. I think that the other thing I'd say in my work in community with, parents and educators and students is often, family voice and student voice can also be some of the most compelling ways to help lead for a change or a new pattern of behavior or way of doing and being. So I know that actually students have been the leaders for us and for me in my professional career around particularly pivots that can be hardest for adults to wrap their heads around. So I think that can be another potential if you've got a student leadership team or another mechanism to think about the way that you lift student voice. And Scott, lots of love for your sermon in the chat. So there you go. That's pretty beautiful. The good news is it's on record.
I'm gonna go. Yeah, I was just thinking that. I'm gonna go back to answering the technical questions in the chat.
All right, Kati, I have to admit I lost our space, our time and space and place. I think we've gone through. Oh, we're ready to talk about the continuity of services plan.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think for this one, this is just a reminder from the last office hours. The ESSER 3 webpage at ODE is the place to find the templates, the instructions, and the links to the smart sheets where you'll share the link on your public facing plan. It is still due August 27th. I'm happy to field more questions or field questions about the safe return to in-person instruction and continuity of services plan as well. One thing I want to say about the plan is, and I think to me this aligns with what Scott was saying, is the plan this year, last year, the operational blueprint was a very school level operational plan about implementing COVID mitigation protocols. Because we're in a local control and local decision-making framework again, the safe return to in-person instruction and continuity of services plan is a description of the district policies, practices, and procedures that are in place that schools will use. And I just want to say out loud and acknowledge again that it's not a one-to-one replacement, because schools are still obviously going to need to do a lot of operational planning and are deeply engaged in that. And at the same time, the heart of the plan remains having those health and safety measures in place and the care and connection and mental health support policies, procedures, and protocols in place to ensure the goal, right? As many days in person for as many students as possible for the coming school year. And that remains what is meaningful about the plan to me. And I'm trying to say that more because I think the plan can feel really wonky. So let me know what's helpful, Jennifer.
Well, I would say that the flood of questions is a good mirror and reflection to everything that you are trying to sense make right now. So it's feeling a little bit overwhelming for me just to try to kind of find some common themes and threads to surface and share out, because the volume is high right now in the chat. So just giving myself permission to kind of breathe and giving you permission to breathe, because I know these questions are right up front there's urgency to leading and making sense of them. Scott, do you want to cue me? Are there questions that you think are good for the whole group? And if so, do you want to put those forward?
Yep, I was just saying thanks to the state librarian for a
Oh, yeah.
suggestion.
Yeah.
So just got that in there. So I think, and I might miss a couple things, but we had one back earlier, and you're right. There's just, there's a lot of different threads, so it's not going to come in a really clean order. But there were the threads around teacher licensure and teachers license if students refuse to wear masks, and about parents, and you wanted to bring that one back. Do you feel like we covered that, or want to say more on the technical side about TSPC and licensure?
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I think let's pick that part of it up. Essentially, there was two parts to the person's question. The second part I think we addressed, which is essentially, are kids really ultimately required to wear masks to be in person? The answer there is yes. The second part of the question is, our teachers are coming back. In fact, for some of you, they're returning. They have returned, and they said one teacher asked today if her license was in jeopardy if a student refuses to wear a mask. So what we wanted to remind people of is, one, we're all making sense of this particular new, I don't know what to call it, stipulation and or potential sanction through TSPC. But the language says that the licenses of licensed educators who willfully refuse or disregard the mask guidance could face additional penalties. So in my way of thinking, that would implicate a teacher who students in their classroom are not wearing masks. They know they're not wearing masks. There's no effort to work with the student to get a mask on and or convene the counselor or the principal to help redirect that behavior, and the student continues to attend school without a mask on, and the teacher does nothing to intervene or to signal a need for more support. Or if the teacher is just willfully refusing. So, sort of sponsoring like, you don't really have to do that here. It doesn't really matter. And, wink, wink, I won't look and I don't care. So in my mind, unless a teacher is, again, willfully refusing or disregarding the guidance and not following through, I don't think that a teacher would be in jeopardy of TSPC action if indeed it was simply a child one day without a mask. That's my sense.
Thanks, Jennifer. And then Kati, Hayden gave a nice answer in the chat, but we got a few different questions about the framework. When will the Ready Schools Resiliency Framework be updated with information? And I know that's a very difficult task to answer, but can you give people any closer sense of timeline for when you anticipate an update?
Tomorrow morning at the latest.
Oh, okay, that's a little more precise. Okay, thank you. And then will the guidance on quarantine for vaccinated people change?
So I will answer that to the best of my ability. I feel like I should caveat that tomorrow morning at the latest, unless there's a new rule or something else that changes. So will guidance, I think that we can all anticipate guidance changing as the science and evidence and our understanding of both the virus and the variants and the efficacy and how the vaccines are working against those new variants and viruses happen. So I don't want to say, I don't know of an update that's imminent, but like I caveated to when the framework will be updated, updates happen all the time. Guidance has changed all the time and we are responsive to it. I think that's part of what's hard about this moment of COVID is that we are very much back to a response space when we were very, at least maybe I should speak for myself, I was very ready for resiliency, optimism. We can get ahead of this kind of space, and we're very much back to a response space. So I think anticipating changes in guidance of all kinds from the federal level is a real thing.
Lisa Jager asked a couple questions. Can you discuss what OD is recommending as far as staff vaccination mandates? Are schools setting up policies requiring vaccinations or weekly testing? And if testing, the rapid test or the more comprehensive test, and who pays for it? So kind of state of play about how people are approaching it, and does OD weigh in with any recommendations?
We don't have any recommendation on that. It is an employer decision. I think you're all probably aware that the governor has instructed state staff to be vaccinated there's no testing out of it, and to be employed moving forward with some set dates. I can't remember them right now. State workers need to be vaccinated, and she's called on private and other public employers to take similar action in Oregon. I don't have scuttlebutt about like what districts are thinking or who's thinking about doing what. I think if you wanted to have more conversation about choices and options around testing, we really would want to invite in our partners from Oregon Health Authority, who could both thoroughly answer those questions and then connect you with the right programs that they run to get done what you want to get done. The Health Authority does have the symptomatic screening program, the Binax Now one that most of you, I think, are probably pretty familiar with, where if someone becomes symptomatic during the day, they can have a rapid test right there at the school and know how the school knows how to proceed, local public health knows how to proceed. And then the voluntary sort of screening program for primarily OHA is interested in unvaccinated educators and staff, but anyone can sign on to it, where you receive a test in the mail, you do your swab, you put it back in the mail, and you receive notification of what your result is, but OHA is using it more in a behind the scenes way to watch rates across the state. So if there's interest in that, that's certainly something we can try to put together, would be to have OHA come in and talk more specifically about that. I don't have any sense that there's a strong conversation about mandates. I know Washington just announced theirs as well.
So the next one, I think I know the answer to, but I'm going to check it to make sure. So Tanya asked about YSEPs and JDEPs for folks not familiar. That's youth correctional facilities and juvenile detention educational programs. And the question is if they need to complete safe return to in-person instruction and continuity of services plans. And I think the answer is they technically don't, because that's a federal requirement under ESSA, and they're not formally local education agencies by structure. And that's a lot of ed policy lingo in a hurry. And it's still a really good idea that they have some version of a kind of general operational plan in terms of how they're thinking about COVID response, but it's not required. They don't have to go through that administrative process and planning in that form. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's accurate. Again, holding at the heart that the planning is about health and safety and ensuring that the mitigation and protections are in place. I would also say that districts who work with those and should have really good, clear communication about expectations around COVID mitigation measures as well. Like, I think that's just good supportive practice for everybody who is involved, whether they're teaching or learning in those.
Then Walt wonders if there's any submitted plans as templates. And I know that was getting worked on, some sample plans. Do we have that ready or not quite yet?
Not quite yet.
Okay, so do we have a timeline of when we might have it by?
Not one that's as firm as the framework update.
Okay. Hang in there, Walt, or Walt, make the template. Just go get it done. See what you come up with. Okay, how about two more? Do we know when the FDA will make formal final approval of the vaccines for adults?
No, it's probably, you could probably somewhat know that by going in and looking at, you know, when FDA does its convenings around these conversations. I think there are public meetings and, you know, there's a federal process for that. I believe it would be, if I were to read the tea leaves from what I hear in the news and sort of the policies that I see happening nationally, I would say it's going to be before the end of October.
And then last one before you wrap us, Jennifer. Kati, if you're a local leader, of all the things that are on the OHA site, so James basically is like, I've got the general OHA site with all the dashboards, but like if I was going to point people at one place to follow and keep track of what's going on with test positivity specifically, like what would be the best place for me to go?
Is the question more about just to have a situational awareness or to have the data
Oregon by
needed for
county, Oregon by county, yeah.
or, okay, so, but is it situational awareness or for making decisions based
Good
on?
question. James, you want to?
Yep. I'm right here. Good to see everybody. Last year we were given these 2-week look back reports. And those we're not getting those anymore. And one of the things that we were tracking there was the delta week to week. So you could look at the graph I was creating my own graph, but you could look at the numbers and you could see what the trends were with the rates, not just the raw case counts. So I'm seeing a lot of the case count graphs and I can see the history there, but I'm curious where I could go see the history of the rates per 100K and the test positivity rates. Thanks.
So I do think the OHA website is still the best place for that. And I totally acknowledge they have so much data on there. It can be very difficult to sort through and quickly find like the piece that you want to understand and make meaning of. We are also working from here on answering the question more for how do we have this, what can we do to have that information more available to you at your fingertips? To be making good policy decisions about how COVID is mitigated. And that's ongoing work. We hope to have the first iteration of that by the end of this month so that you have a place you can go and you're not sorting through the OHA dashboards and your own data and trying to piece it together, but you have a place you can go and kind of see what's available and have a framework for understanding those data. And Scott's actually leading that work. So I would ask him to add as well and sort of answer to that question.
I got a new assignment, friends, and I got it Friday. Where Kati's right, we're going to try to pull together some combination of sources to give you a kind of a one-stop place that gives you both like a mental framework and the numbers that maybe you had before or some other things. Working with some partners. I think we're probably looking at the end of the month as the fast goal. And I will maybe have more to update on a week or two from now. If you have ideas about what you would really love to see there and you don't spam my email, I will put it in here for folks who really want to grapple about that, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you.
James, also just want to name, looks like Ken Greenbaum put something in there that might be helpful to your question. And with that, I just want to be really thoughtful of everybody's time. We're at 4 o'clock. It went fast as it always does. We'll leave this open just for a minute or so. If you want to put in questions that you have in the chat that you want us to hold space for and frame up for next week, we certainly will do that, and hope to see you all on the 23rd. Be healthy, stay well. Thanks for everything you do.